It was a quiet afternoon as a black man, dressed casually in a leather jacket, rolled his motorcycle into a small, quiet diner. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the small town. The man, let's call him Marcus, had just returned from a long stretch of travel across the country, visiting friends and family after a few years of service in the Navy. He had left the military, but the discipline and resilience instilled in him still defined his daily life. Today, though, it was about the simple pleasure of a good meal and some quiet time. The diner was a typical small-town establishment. Old wooden tables, the clink of coffee mugs, and the steady hum of quiet conversations filled the space. Marcus parked his bike outside, taking a moment to admire the machine before heading inside. His boots clicked against the wooden floor as he entered, causing a few heads to turn. But he didn't mind, he had grown used to people noticing him, especially with his strong, athletic build. He made his way to an empty table near the back. The waitress, an older woman with a friendly smile, greeted him and handed him a menu. She asked if he was hungry, and he nodded, taking a moment to scan the choices. Marcus had always been a man of simple tastes, nothing too extravagant. He just wanted a quick meal before hitting the road again. He settled on a burger and fries, and the waitress went off to place his order. As Marcus waited, he noticed a group of men at a table near the window. They were loud, with leather jackets adorned with patches of a motorcycle club. The men, who seemed to be in their mid-30s to early 40s, had an air of arrogance about them. The group was animated, laughing and making jokes, but as they saw Marcus, their conversation quieted for a brief moment. He could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't pay them much attention. He had dealt with people like this before, people who judged others based on their appearance or skin color. The men exchanged a few whispered words and then, one by one, their eyes locked on Marcus. They looked at each other, clearly deciding whether to approach him. Marcus noticed their body language. It was aggressive, predatory. He kept his gaze forward, choosing not to react to their stares. He was used to people making assumptions based on his race, but he had learned long ago that staying calm and composed was the best way to handle these types of situations. The silence between Marcus and the group of bikers grew thick, almost tangible. It was as though the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The bikers had circled around him, trapping him at his table. Their taunts had grown bolder, louder, and more daring, but Marcus didn't flinch. He knew exactly what they were trying to do. They wanted a reaction. They wanted him to rise, to show them that he was angry or scared. But that wasn't going to happen. The room grew thick with tension. Marcus stood in the center, his posture still calm but alert, as the bikers took a step back, assessing the situation. The group, which had once been full of bravado, was now silent, uncertain of how to proceed. Their earlier taunts had died down, and now there was only the sound of their breathing, ragged and heavy. They had underestimated him, and now they were trying to make sense of the sudden shift in power. The sound of the door closing behind the bikers was the last reminder of the tension that had just gripped the diner. Marcus stood still, watching as the group of men walked out of the restaurant, their heads hung low, their shoulders slumped. It was a strange feeling, seeing them leave in defeat. They had come in with so much bravado, so much anger, ready to take on whoever crossed their path. But now, they were leaving as quiet as lambs, their pride shattered, their confidence broken. The other diners in the room slowly began to murmur amongst themselves, the tension lifting. Conversations that had stopped during the confrontation slowly began to resume, but Marcus didn't pay attention to them. His mind was focused, calm, as it always was in moments like this. His hand, still resting on the table, was relaxed, his fingers tapping softly against the wood. The meal he had started had long been forgotten, but the sense of accomplishment was not something he sought. What mattered now was that he had handled the situation without letting it escalate further. As the door closed behind the bikers, The silence that followed felt almost eerie. It was as if the room was holding its breath, waiting for something more to happen. But nothing did. Marcus stayed where he was, his posture unchanged, the stillness of the moment surrounding him like a cocoon. He didn't need to move or speak. He had done what he came here to do: stay composed, stay calm, and leave the situation behind him. The waitress, who had been quietly watching from the sidelines, approached him cautiously. She was an older woman, her face lined with the years of hard work and dedication. She had seen more than her fair share of trouble, but even she seemed shaken by what had just transpired. She didn't know what kind of man Marcus was. She had no idea that he was a Navy SEAL. All she knew was that he had handled the bikers in a way that made her think twice about what it really meant to be tough. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. Marcus met her gaze, his face calm and composed. There was no trace of anger, no sign of the battle that had just taken place. He looked every bit the picture of tranquility. He nodded, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine," he said quietly. "Just a little shaken, but nothing I can't handle." The waitress smiled back, but it was clear that she didn't fully understand. She hadn't seen the bikers' aggression up close. She hadn't seen the way they had closed in on Marcus, hoping for a fight. She hadn't seen how easily Marcus had taken control of the situation, how effortlessly he had turned the tables on them. She didn't know that he was trained to stay calm, to think ahead, and to keep control at all costs. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft with gratitude. "I didn't know how it would end." Marcus didn't respond right away. He simply nodded again, his gaze drifting to the window as he looked out at the now empty street. The bikers were gone, but the weight of the moment lingered in the air. He could still feel the pressure of their stares, the anger in their words, but he had kept his composure. He had not given in to the fight, and that was what mattered. For Marcus, it was never about proving his strength. It wasn't about showing anyone that he could take on a group of bikers or that he could defeat them in a physical altercation. It was about control. Control of his emotions, control of the situation, and control of his own actions. The true strength was not in how hard he could hit, but in how well he could hold himself back. How well he could keep his mind sharp, his body still, and his heart steady. As the minutes passed, the other patrons began to speak again. They had all witnessed what had happened, but they had no idea who Marcus truly was. To them, he was just a man who had stood up to a group of bullies. But to Marcus, it was more than that. It was a reminder of the lessons he had learned in the Navy. The lessons that taught him how to read people, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to handle any situation with the quiet strength of a trained soldier. The conversation in the diner slowly grew louder as the tension continued to fade. The waitress returned to her post behind the counter, though she glanced at Marcus once more, her eyes filled with curiosity and admiration. He knew she had questions everyone who had witnessed the altercation did, but Marcus wasn't interested in answering them. His thoughts were already on the next step, the next leg of his journey. He wasn't here for validation. He wasn't here for recognition. He was here for a quiet meal and a few moments of peace before he moved on. Marcus stood up from his table, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't rush. There was no need to. He knew exactly where he was going. He turned to the waitress as he reached the door and gave her a polite nod. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice calm. "I'll be on my way." The waitress smiled back at him, a mixture of relief and gratitude in her eyes. "Take care of yourself, sir. And, thank you for handling that." Marcus gave her a small smile, then turned and walked out the door. The sound of his boots on the pavement was steady, the only sound in the quiet street. The sun had almost set now, casting a warm glow over the town as the last remnants of daylight faded. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the sunset. He wasn't thinking about the bikers or the diner or the people who had watched him. His mind was already focused on the road ahead. As he walked to his motorcycle, Marcus glanced over his shoulder one last time at the diner. The windows were still reflecting the fading light, and the people inside were still talking, still recovering from the tense moment that had just passed. But Marcus had already moved on. For him, it was just another day in the life of someone who had learned the true meaning of strength, control, and discipline. He climbed onto his bike and started the engine. The sound of the motorcycle filled the air, a low rumble that signaled his departure. With one last glance at the town behind him, he pulled out onto the road, the tires humming against the asphalt as he rode off into the night. The bikers had come looking for trouble, but they had left with nothing. Marcus had shown them that it wasn't always about strength in numbers or force. Sometimes, true strength was in knowing when to walk away, knowing when to control the situation without needing to fight. And that was something they would never understand. As the road stretched out before him, Marcus felt a sense of peace settle over him. The world was still full of challenges, full of people who misunderstood him or who thought they could push him around. But he knew he would always be ready, calm, controlled, and focused on what truly mattered. And with that, he rode into the night, leaving the past behind him and looking forward to whatever came next. The air in the diner felt charged, heavy with the remnants of what had just happened. The bikers, their pride bruised and their spirits crushed, had finally retreated. Marcus, standing alone in the middle of the room, felt the weight of their presence lift as they walked out the door. The sounds of their footsteps echoed, the door swinging shut behind them with a soft clink that signaled the end of the confrontation. But Marcus wasn't ready to relax just yet. The situation wasn't over. He could feel the tension lingering in the air, a storm waiting to break. The room was still. There were no more taunts or insults, no more mocking laughter. The other patrons of the diner were silent, watching him with wide eyes. Some were uneasy, some were intrigued, and a few seemed impressed. But Marcus didn't care about their stares. He wasn't here to entertain anyone or prove anything. He had handled the situation the only way he knew how, with control and precision. He turned back to his table, his movements slow and deliberate. His meal was still there, untouched for the moment. The burger and fries were just as he had ordered them, but the taste of the moment lingered in his mouth, sour and unsatisfying. He wasn't hungry anymore. He knew that the bikers wouldn't let this go, that they would come back angrier, more dangerous, and he wasn't about to be caught off guard. The moment wasn't over. As Marcus sat back down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the tension wasn't just in the air. It was in him, too. His hand rested on the edge of his table, his fingers tapping in a slow, methodical rhythm. He had been trained to stay calm under pressure, to control his emotions, but that didn't mean his instincts weren't firing. His mind was calculating, thinking, analyzing the situation. The bikers would regroup. They wouldn't just let this slip away. They would want revenge. It was the only thing they knew how to do, react with force. But Marcus wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Not this time. Just as he picked up his burger, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the diner door opening again. He didn't look up immediately, but his muscles tensed, his eyes flickering to the entrance. His instincts were on high alert, his body ready for whatever came next. The door closed with a soft click, but the steps that followed were much heavier than before. The atmosphere in the diner shifted again. This time, it wasn't just the usual quiet chatter or the faint clinking of plates. The energy was different, more dangerous. Marcus put his burger back down, his hand hovering near his jacket. He didn't need to look up to know who had entered. He could hear their boots, the rough shuffling of feet, and the unmistakable sound of leather against the floor. He didn't need to see the bikers to know that they had come back. They were here for something. Something more than just a confrontation. The stocky man, the one who had been the leader of the group, stepped into view first. His face was flushed with rage, and his fists were clenched at his sides. Behind him, the others followed, each one with a look of determination in their eyes. They weren't here to talk anymore. They had come back for payback. Marcus's gaze lifted slowly to meet the leader's eyes. There was no fear in Marcus's expression. Only calm, unshakable resolve. The stocky biker's eyes flickered with uncertainty for a moment, but he quickly masked it with anger. "You think you can just walk away from this?" the man spat, his voice low and dangerous. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. His posture was relaxed, his body language giving nothing away. He knew what was coming. The bikers weren't here for a conversation. They were here for a fight. The younger biker, the one with the wild look in his eyes, stepped forward this time. His hands were twitching at his sides, eager to make the first move. He was the one who had been most eager to fight before, and he was still itching for it. "I told you once," Marcus's voice was steady, his words clear. "I don't want a fight. You need to leave. Now." The bikers didn't listen. Instead, the younger man lunged at him, trying to push Marcus back. But Marcus was faster, and with a simple step to the side, he sidestepped the man's attempt. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back in a way that left the biker gasping in surprise. The younger man struggled to break free, but Marcus's grip was firm and unyielding. He applied just enough pressure to show the man who was in control, but he didn't push him to the point of injury. "Do you want to try again?" Marcus asked, his tone cool. The group of bikers stopped in their tracks, their eyes wide in disbelief. The leader, the stocky man, clenched his fists, his face red with anger. He had underestimated Marcus before, and now it was clear that he wasn't going to walk away with the upper hand. The bikers were realizing the situation wasn't as simple as they had hoped. They had come here looking for a fight, but they hadn't counted on facing someone who was trained to handle exactly this kind of situation. The stocky man's voice broke the silence, his words laced with frustration. "You're not going to get away with this, you know," he said, trying to regain some control over the situation. "We run this town. You're nothing but a joke." Marcus didn't flinch. He wasn't intimidated. "You're making a mistake. Walk away while you still can," he said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it that let the bikers know he wasn't playing games anymore. The younger man struggled harder now, trying to free himself from Marcus's grip, but Marcus only tightened his hold. His strength was overwhelming, yet controlled. The others were starting to see that the situation was escalating beyond their control. The stocky biker made a move, signaling for the others to surround Marcus, hoping that numbers would give them the advantage. But Marcus had been trained for this. He knew how to fight multiple opponents, how to read their body language, and how to control the battlefield. As the bikers closed in on him, Marcus's eyes shifted to the nearest exit, planning his next move. But he didn't want to escalate things further. He had no intention of hurting anyone. He just needed them to understand. The stocky biker growled, a mix of frustration and anger clouding his thoughts. He took one step forward, trying to appear menacing. But Marcus remained still, watching him carefully, his hands still firmly controlling the younger man's arm. "Enough," Marcus said, his voice firm and unwavering. For a moment, the bikers hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. They were still angry, still humiliated, but they were starting to see the futility of their actions. The situation had gone from a simple confrontation to something far more dangerous. Marcus wasn't a regular man. He was someone who had the skills, the training, and the mental discipline to keep control. With the weight of his words hanging in the air, Marcus let go of the younger biker's arm, pushing him lightly away. The man stumbled back, eyes wide with shock and pain. He wasn't expecting to be treated with such calculated precision. The group of bikers stood frozen, now realizing they had underestimated the man they had tried to bully. "Get out," Marcus said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Now." The stocky man looked at the others, his anger still burning, but he knew it was over. They had been bested, and they couldn't win this fight. Without another word, the bikers turned and walked out of the diner, their heads lowered in defeat. They didn't say anything as they left. Their pride had been broken, and they knew they couldn't win. Marcus watched them go, his expression unreadable. He didn't care about the fight. He didn't care about their taunts. All he wanted was to walk away from this unscathed. The bikers had come looking for trouble, but Marcus had shown them that sometimes, the best way to handle a fight was not to fight at all. The stocky biker, the one who had been the most vocal, stared at Marcus for a long moment. His eyes flickered between Marcus and his friends, but he didn't speak right away. The others, too, seemed unsure, glancing at one another as though searching for a signal, a way to regain control. It was clear they hadn't expected the situation to turn out like this. They had thought Marcus was just another easy target, a man they could bully into submission. But now, they were seeing a different side of him, someone who wasn't afraid to stand his ground. After what felt like an eternity of silence, the stocky man finally spoke, his voice low but filled with forced bravado. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh?" he sneered. "You think you can just push us around and walk away?" Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence alone was enough to communicate his resolve. But the bikers weren't ready to back down. They had been challenged, and in their minds, they needed to prove something. They needed to reassert their dominance. The biker closest to Marcus, a younger man with a wild expression, stepped forward. He was visibly agitated, his hands fidgeting with the straps of his jacket. "You think you're tough? You think you're the one who decides what happens here?" He shook his head as though he couldn't believe what was happening. "You've made a big mistake, man. We don't back down from anyone." Marcus's eyes never left him. He could feel the heat rising in the room, the nervous energy in the air. The group was on edge, but Marcus had been in tense situations before. This wasn't anything new. The biker was trying to rile him up, trying to provoke him into making a mistake, but Marcus was focused. He wasn't going to let them drag him into their game. Another biker, a tall man with a scruffy beard, joined in. "What's the matter?" he said with a mocking laugh. "Scared of a little confrontation?" The tone was less playful now. There was an edge to his words. Marcus could feel the tension building. The bikers were circling again, but this time, there was a noticeable shift. They were no longer sure of themselves. Their confidence had cracked, replaced by uncertainty and anger. And that made them dangerous. As the group continued to close in on him, Marcus knew that the situation was reaching a breaking point. He could feel the danger creeping closer, like a storm ready to burst. The bikers were growing more aggressive with each passing second, and Marcus knew they weren't going to stop until they had pushed him into a fight. But he wasn't going to let that happen. One of the men made a sudden move, perhaps out of frustration, or perhaps because he saw an opening. But Marcus was ready. In a split second, he stepped to the side, using the biker's momentum against him. The man stumbled past, off balance, and before he could react, Marcus had already grabbed him by the arm and twisted it behind his back. The other bikers froze, eyes wide in surprise. They hadn't expected Marcus to move so fast, so decisively. It was like watching a controlled explosion, a single strike that sent shockwaves through the group. The man in Marcus's grasp struggled for a moment, trying to break free, but Marcus tightened his grip, applying just enough pressure to make him realize there was no escaping. "Let him go," the stocky biker growled, his voice thick with anger. He took a step forward, but he wasn't sure whether to come to the aid of his friend or hold back. The group was divided now. Some were angry, ready to jump in and help their fallen comrade, while others were starting to question whether they had made the right choice in picking a fight. Marcus's eyes shifted from the man in his grasp to the group as a whole. He wasn't trying to provoke them, he was simply asserting control. "You've got two choices," he said, his voice low and firm. "You can walk away, and we can forget this ever happened. Or, you can keep pushing, and I'll make sure you regret it." For a moment, there was no movement. The bikers stood in silence, their eyes flickering between each other. Some of them were still determined to stand their ground, but others were hesitating. Marcus could see the doubt in their eyes now, the realization that they had underestimated him. They had been ready to fight, to overpower him, but they weren't prepared for someone who could hold his ground so easily, who could match their aggression with calm, controlled strength. The stocky man let out a frustrated growl, but he didn't move forward. Instead, he turned to the others, a look of uncertainty in his eyes. "We don't need to deal with this," he muttered. "Let's go." But there was still one biker who wasn't ready to back down. The younger man with the wild look in his eyes, who had been the first to step up, wasn't satisfied. His pride was on the line now, and he wasn't about to let Marcus walk away as the victor. He lunged forward, trying to shove Marcus away, but Marcus was faster. In a single, fluid motion, he sidestepped, grabbing the man's arm and using his own momentum to throw him to the ground. The sound of the man hitting the floor echoed through the diner, and the room went silent again. The bikers stood frozen, eyes wide, staring at the scene unfolding before them. Marcus didn't say a word. He simply stood over the man, who was now lying on the floor, gasping for air. This time, the group was ready to leave. The stocky biker turned to his friends, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "We're done here," he muttered. Without another word, the group of bikers began to shuffle toward the door. Their movements were hesitant, their confidence shattered. They had come into this diner thinking they could take control, thinking they could bully someone into submission. But now, they were leaving in defeat. Marcus didn't watch them leave. He stood there, calm and composed, as if nothing had happened. His focus shifted back to the table where his food was waiting. He was ready to move on, to finish his meal and continue on his journey. The bikers had come looking for trouble, but in the end, they had found themselves face to face with something they couldn't handle. As the last of the bikers left the diner, the door swung shut behind them with a soft thud. The room remained quiet for a few moments longer before the murmur of conversation started up again. People who had been watching from the sidelines began to return to their meals, the normal hum of the diner slowly coming back to life. Marcus sat back down at his table, his calm demeanor never wavering. He picked up his fork, looking at the plate of food in front of him, and took a bite. It was nothing extraordinary, just a simple burger and fries, but it tasted better now. It tasted like peace. One of the bikers, the stocky man with the thick beard, leaned in closer. His breath smelled of cheap alcohol, his words dripping with arrogance. "What's the matter, huh? Not gonna fight back?" he sneered, eyes glinting with a mix of hatred and excitement. The other bikers stood just behind him, grinning, their hands resting on their hips or crossed in front of their chests. But Marcus remained perfectly still. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his mind was sharp and calculating. Every move the bikers made, every shift in their body language, was registered in his mind. It was something he had trained himself to do in the Navy. Stay aware of your surroundings, read people, and never let your emotions get the best of you. "You know," the stocky man continued, his voice rising as he tried to provoke Marcus further, "you're nothing but a little punk. Probably don't even have the guts to defend yourself, huh?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He simply met the man's eyes with calm resolve. His silence was louder than any words could be. It was clear that Marcus wasn't intimidated. The bikers didn't seem to understand this, their faces twisting in frustration. The leader of the group, clearly growing impatient, reached down to grab Marcus's jacket, giving it a rough tug, almost as if daring him to stand up. The waitress, who had been quietly watching from a distance, paused for a moment, but then quickly went to the back, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. She had seen trouble before, but this felt different. There was something about Marcus's calm demeanor that made her uneasy. She had no idea that this was no ordinary man she was witnessing. The stocky man now grabbed Marcus's chair, tilting it slightly, as though trying to throw him off balance. "What, you don't think we're gonna do anything to you?" His voice was mocking, and his words were like an invitation to escalate the situation. He was pushing for a fight, hoping Marcus would finally snap. The others stepped forward, moving in closer, eager to watch what they assumed would be a confrontation. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Marcus finally stood up. His movements were deliberate and slow, never hurried, never frantic. His feet planted firmly on the ground, and his shoulders squared. The bikers paused, momentarily caught off guard by his height and presence. They were expecting someone smaller, someone who would be easily intimidated. But they were wrong. "Look, man," the stocky biker said, his tone now tinged with nervousness, "you don't have to be like this. We're just having a little fun." But Marcus could see the bluff in his eyes. The other bikers stood with their arms crossed, each one waiting for the signal to strike. They all wanted to prove their superiority, but none of them had the nerve to make the first move. Marcus remained silent, his eyes never leaving the man in front of him. He wasn't just dealing with a group of bullies, he was dealing with people who had convinced themselves that they were in control. And in that moment, Marcus knew it wasn't about winning the fight, it was about controlling the situation. If he gave in to their games, they would think they had won. But he wasn't going to let that happen. One of the bikers, a younger man with a wild look in his eyes, pushed forward. He was shorter than the others, but his bravado made up for it. "What's the matter?" he sneered, "you too good to talk to us now?" He got in Marcus's face, his breath hot and sharp. Marcus didn't move. He simply took a deep breath, a technique he had perfected over years of training. He could feel the tension rising in the room, but his heart remained steady. There was no rush, no need to respond quickly. The situation wasn't out of his control, it was just a matter of letting it play out. "Guys, we should just leave him alone," another one of the bikers muttered. He was clearly uncomfortable with the way things were escalating, but the others ignored him. The leader of the group, the man with the thick beard, wasn't ready to back down. "You don't get it, do you?" he growled. "You think you can just walk in here and ignore us? We run this place. You're nothing but a joke to us." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He wasn't about to be baited into a fight, but he knew the situation was growing increasingly dangerous. The group wasn't backing off, they were looking for an excuse to make things violent. He wasn't going to give it to them. In a smooth motion, Marcus stepped back, his foot tapping the edge of the chair behind him. He took one step to the side, slowly shifting his weight, keeping his movements controlled. His body language made it clear he wasn't looking for a confrontation, but he wasn't about to let anyone threaten him either. The bikers seemed to hesitate, uncertain of how to proceed. Marcus's demeanor was calm, almost serene, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet intensity that couldn't be ignored. The stocky biker gritted his teeth, clearly frustrated. He thought he had the upper hand, but now, he wasn't so sure. At that moment, Marcus knew it was time to end the standoff. Without warning, he stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the group. His movement was fast, calculated, and efficient, like a predator closing in on its prey. Before anyone could react, Marcus grabbed the arm of the man closest to him, twisting it with the precision of someone who had trained for years in hand-to-hand combat. The biker yelped in surprise as Marcus used his own momentum to spin him around and disarm him. The rest of the bikers froze, wide-eyed. They hadn't expected this. What they thought was an easy target had turned into a moment of complete reversal. Marcus didn't strike, he didn't need to. His control of the situation was all they needed to see. One move, one moment, and they knew they were no longer in charge. The stocky biker, who had been the loudest, now stood speechless. He stared at Marcus, realizing too late that he was dealing with someone far more skilled than he could have imagined. The others stepped back, suddenly aware of the gravity of the situation. Marcus's expression remained calm, but his voice was firm and unwavering as he spoke for the first time in a while. "If you want to keep going, we can. But you're going to regret it." There was no bravado in his voice, no anger. Just a quiet warning. One of the men, a large, stocky fellow with a thick beard, stood up and walked over to Marcus's table. He was the leader of the group, his body language suggesting authority. He had a smirk on his face as he leaned in, resting one hand on the back of the chair opposite Marcus. "Hey there, buddy," the man said loudly, his voice dripping with mockery. "Don't see many of you around these parts." Marcus looked up, his expression unchanging. "Just passing through," he replied calmly, his voice even. The man chuckled, and the others at the table started laughing too. It was a laugh filled with judgment, but Marcus didn't flinch. He had dealt with worse. "You know, we don't get many people of your kind around here," the man continued, his voice still taunting. "What brings you to this small town?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He didn't feel the need to explain himself to anyone. He simply met the man's eyes, calm and steady, allowing the silence to grow between them. The man seemed to take this as a challenge. "What's wrong, you too good to talk to us?" he said with a sneer. A few of the other bikers started to get up, making their way toward Marcus's table. They circled him, standing around him with arms crossed, blocking his escape route. But Marcus remained seated, his posture relaxed but alert. He could feel the tension in the air, but he didn't let it rattle him. This was nothing compared to what he had faced in his years of military service. His training taught him to stay calm, to assess every situation with a clear mind, and to never let anger take control. The group of bikers started to make more obvious comments now, their words dripping with racism. They made fun of his appearance, his clothes, his demeanor. But Marcus didn't react. He just sat there, letting them talk. He wasn't going to dignify their insults with a response. "I bet you don't even know what it's like to work for a living," one of them sneered, as the others chuckled. "I'm sure you haven't done a real job in your life, right?" another said, their tone mocking. Marcus's hand clenched around the edge of his table, but he didn't rise to the bait. His mind was focused. He had been trained to handle far more dangerous situations, and this was just a group of men who were ignorant and looking for trouble. The best thing he could do was keep his cool and not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Just as the insults continued to pour in, the door to the diner opened, and a few more patrons walked in. One of them, a middle-aged man who seemed like a regular, noticed the group surrounding Marcus. His eyes lingered on the bikers, and then they turned to Marcus. The man, who was wearing a suit, seemed to sense the tension in the air, but he didn't intervene. Instead, he sat down at a booth across the room, keeping his gaze on the scene unfolding. The bikers didn't seem to care that more people were entering the diner. They were enjoying themselves, laughing and taunting, but their focus remained solely on Marcus. Their words became louder, more aggressive, as they tried to provoke a reaction from him. They wanted him to stand up, to argue, to fight back. They wanted him to show weakness. But Marcus wasn't going to give them what they wanted. He wasn't going to get pulled into their petty game. He had bigger things to worry about, things that required far more focus than the ignorance of a few men. As he sat there, waiting for his meal, Marcus remained calm, a quiet strength radiating from him. The bikers continued to taunt him, but he didn't let their words penetrate. It was only a matter of time before this encounter would escalate. But Marcus was ready. He had been trained for moments like this. He knew that staying calm, staying composed, was the key to overcoming whatever came next.